それでは次にウィリアム・ F ・ベントレー WCRP 国際委員会事務総長による基調講演に移らせていただきます。Mr. William F. Bentley, please proceed to the podium.
Very warm greetings to all here. It's truly my joy to participate in this extremely important symposium on this very important day. Mr. Johan Sanz, we appreciate you particularly in the work that you're leading with UNHCR here. Madam Ogata, your presence means so much to all of us. Some of what I'm going to mention can be traced back to your own remarkable contributions. And Representative Aisawa, we thank you for the leadership on refugees, and I particularly thank you in the name of all of the religious communities in South Thailand that you have been a principal to help the Japanese government recognize that religious communities can work together without promoting their particular sectarian belief agenda narrowly, but work together. And so I think this is pioneering leadership that you've been exercising for us. This afternoon, I would like to begin by reflecting on a kind of revolution that is taking place among the religious communities. It's a revolution of learning how to become religiously bilingual. That's an odd term, and I'm going to try to share what that means. And I'd like to point out that it was events here in Japan that helped to animate this revolution of religious bilingualism and to unleash its practical, action-oriented significance around the world. Second, I want to focus on the language we use for refugees and asylum seekers. Now, clearly, the legal distinctions that are essential for UNHCR's own mission have enduring importance, very, very central importance. I want to suggest that two notions championed by the religious communities can have great significance. And these notions are human dignity, you mentioned it in your own remark, and shared security, a notion that, Madam Ogata, your own work really provided stimulus to the religious communities for. Third, I want to make just brief reflections with you on the procedure, the method that can be useful in mobilizing the very specific assets that the religious communities have in relationship to the challenges that refugees and asylum seekers and the communities trying to receive them all experience. First, these comments on religious bilingualism. Now, this can sound rather abstract and seemingly not so directly related to the concrete challenges, but in my experience around the world, it's enormously important. Just 43 years ago, some 250 senior religious leaders from all major religions and coming from all continents boarded planes to come here to Japan. Their planes took off. They were aiming for Kyoto, but in a very genuine sense, they were moving into the future. The British historian Arnold Toynbee observed the meeting that took place in Kyoto in 1970 as an historic event. The first time in recorded history, the world's diverse religious leaders gathered themselves around the fundamental challenges of peace. They didn't gather to debate or defend their differing doctrines. Those, for them, still valid concerns were for other forums. Rather, they gathered as allies to face together the forces that were menacing the entire human family. Would the world annihilate itself in a nuclear war? That was the crisis of that hour. It was in response to that crisis that WCRP was born here in Japan in 1970. That meeting, 43 years ago, has proved to have enduring value. Beyond the urgent, specific topic it addressed, and beyond the projects it initiated, including one focused on refugees from Vietnam, that meeting helped to foster a fundamental shift in the consciousness of the world's religious communities. That shift in awareness is the recognition that today religious communities need to be bilingual, and that being bilingual is the key to effective multi-religious and even multi-stakeholder collaboration that involves religious communities. Now, clearly, the first language that each religious community has is its own primary language. It's the language Buddhists have to talk about Buddhism with Buddhists, or that Christians have to talk among Christians about Christianity, or Islam to talk about Islam, or Shinto to talk about Shintoism. But the second language that I'm referring to, I like to call a kind of shared public language. And I don't use the word secular for public because secular has historically been too freighted with anti-religious elements. Instead, I think today the religious communities need to continue speaking their own primary religious language among their own believers, but since not all are believers of any one religion, they also need to be able to speak in a public idiom. Today, religious leaders are indeed learning how to speak both of those languages. Those 250 religious leaders who boarded planes to come here to Japan 43 years ago not only became religiously bilingual, meaning they put issues of common concern squarely before them, but they began to institutionalize the need for religions to be able to speak two languages. They began to build multi-religious mechanisms that could facilitate collaboration in that second public language, the language of shared care, a common moral language, a language of common commitment to action. And so I dwell on that. It is really a revolution that's taking place all around the world among the religious communities, because it's key if we are indeed going to engage the religious communities as fundamental partners in the collaborative work that UNHCR is calling all of us to join into. The second point that I would like to share is what I would call a multi-religious horizon. By horizon, I mean a framework for how we would understand refugees, asylum seekers, all the categories of concerned populations of UNHCR. My commitment here is that the way we frame things, the way we frame issues, the breadth or narrowness of our notions sets the horizon of our care, determines the shape of our caring. So I want to ask, what basic contribution can religious communities make to the language of refugees and asylum seekers? What would the religious communities bring to the discussion that has to be the public discussion for all of us? To be faithful to the shift in consciousness I described in the first point, we would recognize that each religious community needs to examine this question of refugees in its own religious language. So Buddhists need to analyze it as Buddhists, or Christians as Christians, Muslims as Muslims, and so on. But beyond that, how could the religious communities contribute to multi-religious notions that are public, that we can bring to the table, that we can join with UNHCR to help frame the challenges of refugees. There are two notions that I believe can have a decisive importance for us. They are human dignity, number one, and secondly, shared security, number two. I want to hasten to say that not only religious communities can contribute to these notions, people of goodwill of all kinds of persuasions can contribute to them, but I think it is also fair to say that these notions, and I'll describe them, are very deeply congenial to the historic concerns of the religious communities. The importance of these two basic notions, human dignity and shared security, comes into focus when we pay attention to the categories of immigrants. Terms like refugee, migrant, forced migrant, immigrant, undocumented, internally displaced person, and alien are some of the most common terms one finds in the literature. Linking these terms with relevant legal codes is extremely important, so I want to note my appreciation for the value of this specialized vocabulary related to diverse populations in migration, especially a term like refugee that is defined clearly in the 1951 United Nations Convention relating to the status of refugees. Nevertheless, and having expressed a genuine recognition of the need for these kinds of terms, nevertheless, these specialized terms are inherently limited. They are simply not adequate to the human reality of the people being categorized. They all too often place the people being categorized in unequal relations with those who are receiving them. They leave unexpressed, critically important dimensions of human existence. So to complement these specialized terms, not replace them, let's think of the notion human dignity. It's a basic notion that the world's religious communities are turning to when they together are speaking that second public language. It's a term they're using when they try to speak about the ultimate worth of human existence. These multi-religious groups recognize that each diverse tradition has its own way of anchoring human dignity in that tradition's experience of the sacred. This dignity is inalienable. You cannot be separated from it. It's not given by religions. It's not given by cultures, by states, societies, communities, or individuals. So it cannot be taken away by any of them. Moreover, religious groups recognize that this dignity must be restored, must be addressed whenever it is violated. In short, knowing that a person is a refugee, a migrant, a forced migrant, an immigrant, and so on, is a terribly important detail. And we need these detailed categories to grasp these situations. But a person's most basic identity is their inalienable dignity. Human dignity is even more basic, I would submit, than human rights. Rights flow from human dignity. Being legal or illegal does not change one's human dignity. Being legal or illegal does change legal obligations, but it does not alter our religiously rooted, at least for the religious communities, obligations to honor, protect, and restore the dignity of others. When it comes to human dignity, there is no in-group and no out-group. All are equal due to a status that none earned, but which all are called to receive and to respect. Placing human dignity and the obligation to restore it when it has been violated at the center of the debate on refugees, I think will add to the important categories that UNHCR understandably has to deal so centrally with. Very quickly, I move to a second notion. Madam Ogata, here is where the religious communities have been deeply inspired by your work on human security. They have begun to forge for themselves a notion that builds out of human security of shared security. And it focuses on our fundamental vulnerability as human beings. We're all mortal. We're all going to die. And it questions all of us as to how we are going to manage our fundamental vulnerability. Will we use it to illegitimately try to secure ourselves at the expense of others, or does our vulnerability, if lived openly and honestly, invite us into an appreciation and understanding and a compassion of those who are also vulnerable? So this term of shared security, dealing with our vulnerability, also dealing with our interrelatedness, that in fact your security and my security are profoundly interrelated. There simply aren't walls today high enough to insulate ourselves from the least secure among us, and that indeed we are called by a notion such as shared security into a profound recognition that the well-being of the refugee is in fact deeply linked to our own personal well-being. Finally, I'd like to make just a few comments about how I think the religious communities can go about more methodically capturing their own capacities for action. It begins very much like this symposium. We start by putting the challenges that refugees are facing right at the center of the table. We turn to UNHCR to help us to analyze those challenges. And all of us further refine them, add texture to the challenges that refugees are facing. That's number one. But once we've done that, we've got to drive those challenges and express those challenges as fundamental roles. What has to be done? And once we have roles, we've taken challenges and translated them into roles, the religious communities can use those roles as a kind of lens to go back and re-inventory themselves. What do the religious communities have that could contribute to addressing those very specific roles? If you're a Buddhist, what does the imperative to act like a bodhisattva do in terms of a training? How would that help equip one to deal with the human realities of refugees? If you have an ethics of unrestricted compassion, how does that relate? How is that a resource to deal with building a culture that could welcome refugees? And as was already noted, if you have a panoply of local religious temples, how could they be an asset to assist to assist the refugee populations? Finally, we've got to know how to, if we can identify assets, we've got to know how to mobilize them. And here, nothing works like working, and that is to be gathered and to recognize very specific projects that all of us would commit ourselves to. Does this work? My very simple answer is that it does work. I have observed it all over the world, that enormously challenging problems from conflict to big disease pandemics like AIDS are, when they're approached in this way, the religious communities discover enormous assets that they can bring to the table. That's surely the case in the situation of refugees. I conclude, and I simply mention with enormous personal gratitude, Japan has played an irreplaceable role in helping to advance the religious bilingualism that is essential for multi-religious cooperation. Second, Japan has helped us to develop the multi-religious categories of human dignity and shared security. And finally, Japan, particularly through WCRP in Japan, has helped to pioneer around the world this simple but creative method for multi-religious action that I have just noted. Using this legacy here in Japan to tackle immigration issues will surely honor the human dignity and shared security of those who were born here, as well as those fortunate enough to find their way here. For your kind attention and patience with me, I want to thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your speech note. ベンドレー WCRP 国際委員会事務総長の基調講演でした。さて、本日のシンポジアムの共催である明治大学と UNHCR 駐日事務所は難民高等プログラムの名のもとにパートナーシップを組み、日本国内に住む難民を大学生として受け入れております。私もその中の一人なのですが、続けてご登壇いただくのは、明治大学から奨学金で学ぶ学生です。ジャファル・アタイさんはアフリカニスタンから日本に難民として避難していらっしゃいます。アタイさんには日本に暮らす難民としてご自身の経験をお話しいただきます。アタイさん、よろしくお願いします。
Thank you. I am a refugee. I am here today to share my experience that what challenges did I face and who helped me to overcome difficult times. I also want to say a few words about the problems of Afghan refugees living in Japan. As you know that when there is a civil war in an area or in a country, one of the common things that people do to save their lives is to flee the war-torn area. Though it is a very difficult decision to leave their houses, communities, and so much of their belongings. And when they leave, they are not certain that what kind of challenges are waiting ahead of them. And mostly, it is not a travel with good conditions, safety, and good means of transportation. Let me share with you very briefly about the journey I made from my hometown to Tokyo. I was born in 1990 in Kabul, the capital city of Afghanistan. My family had a comfortable life. We had a large 3-story house with a beautiful garden in it. When I was around 3 years old, my family was pushed out of my house by people nowadays known as Taliban, the terrorists. They did not allow us to take anything with us. We had only the clothes we were wearing. Though I was very young, but I still remember it. They made our house as their army base. My family first took refuge in our neighbor's house, but as the civil war was getting more and more intense, we decided to go to another district of Kabul. For the next 6 years, we saw so many inhuman, distressing, traumatizing, and brutal actions committed by those people and people like them. In the whole this period of time, we were desperately struggling to find a safe place to live. We fled from one city to another city. When I was 9 years old, my mother managed to get out of Afghanistan and we went to Pakistan. But from the beginning we knew that it's not a safe place. But at that time we had no other option but to accept the bitter truth, the truth that we are not able to do anything better than this. We lived in Pakistan for around 10 years. My family had difficult times in Pakistan. At the beginning of the first 4 years, we lived in a city called Abbottabad. Unlike nowadays that the Pakistani government is fighting the Taliban, on those days the Taliban were supported by the Pakistani government and a large number of Pakistani people. And we were the people who fled from the Taliban government, therefore we had to hide the religious sect we were belonging to. And my mother even taught me to call myself as Wahhabi rather than a Shia Muslim. In Pakistan also we had to move from one place to another place and from one city to another city in order to protect ourselves. In such conditions, we were lucky enough that I and my siblings went to school. But we did not stop struggling to find a safer place. In July 2009, we came to Japan. We had very limited information about Japan and the Japanese culture, but we knew that Japan, in terms of safety, is one of the best countries in the world. But soon I found that life is not going to be easy in Japan, at least for the first few years. We were a family of 6 people. My father, the only breadwinner of my family, was fired from his job. He was trying very hard to find a new job, but it was not going to be easy, an easy matter for him. We could not afford to go to Japanese language school. We did not have enough money to buy all the goods and materials we needed for our family. There were some Japanese friends of my father who tried to help us, but the problems were very big. Financial problems, culture shock, language barrier, lack of a mosque or community center, and so many other problems gave us so much pain. I personally was helping the family with daily matters and trying to find a way to solve some of our problems. I also was very keen to find a way to higher education, something that I was long dreaming for. After 1 year of struggling with problems and self-studying, I finally found a way and money to attend 1.5 year Japanese language program. Later, I found the help by the Refugee higher education program with the cooperation of Meiji University. I am now honored with a very good scholarship that I believe can help me to achieve my goals. The Meiji University has helped me extraordinarily. The university even has built a wonderful room for Muslim students to pray. I am very grateful of, and I'm now living I'm now living a safe life. Here, the point that I want to stress that helped me and my family so much and still help us through the difficult times is to never become hopeless. This is one of the key beliefs that help us pass through all the bloody streets and destroyed cities and find out our way out. As we Muslims say that the one hopeless from Allah's blessing is Satan. This is the sentence that gives me aspiration and motivation. This is what makes me not to become hopeless and find peace in very difficult times. But God Himself does not come in person to help each of us. God helps mankind through mankind. When I was a child, especially the times that we had very little food to eat, in very intense war times, there were people who were risking their lives and they were trying to give food, medication and shelter to people for survival. Those kind of people gave me strength. They made me believe that we can get out of this situation and that there would be good times again. And they made me hopeful that I can make my way to a peaceful life. Therefore, I believe it is very important to keep the United Nations agencies and other NGOs to progress more actively. And in order to help refugees to adjust to a new place, we need the full cooperation of local governments and all religious groups with NGOs and educational institutions. Refugees need so many kinds of help after they arrive to a new place. Refugees need financial support. Refugees need to have a community and a community center. In this way, the refugees can celebrate and can celebrate and come together in their religious and cultural events. For example, when I was in Osaka, there were some 6 Afghan families. We were trying to celebrate our cultural and religious ceremonies, but we did not have a small hall that can bear only 30 people. Often we canceled. Even when we were getting together, we mostly divided into 2 groups and celebrated our cultural events and religious ceremonies into 2 different places at the same time. Lack of a community center was a big problem. The long-term residential visa is life-saving for refugees, but they need more help to live a common life of a local person. Therefore, refugees are far weaker than a common person may think of. After the refugees arrive in a new country, we must help the refugees to overcome the obstacles in the way to a normal life. At the end, I would like to say that helping refugees is a huge contribution to the humanity and for the peace of the world. And I believe that we have been always so much focused on our differences when it comes to our culture, religion, and religious section, in a very negative way, rather than stressing on our similarities and appreciating this fact. I believe helping the refugees from different social backgrounds is a very big contribution to the convergence of the world. Thank you very much for your attention.
あたいさん、ありがとうございました。